Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Kat. We're looking at my bluish fountain pens that I own, around 20, and these are the tools. So we have got my trusty 3-glass cocktail stirrers that I got off Shein for £2. Then I've gone for 2 dip pens with a zebra G-nib. The list says 1 because that's my usual tool list, but I've also got Tom Studio magnets at the back. They're supposed to help you keep more ink on the nib, on the dip nib. Then we have 1 dip pen with either poster nib or ornament nib. So I went with ornament, and then we have the Midori, my usual. This is the ink swatching book that I have decided is my go-to. It just shows the inks to their best effect. And then finally, usually I use a stencil, so we'll have a look at what I tend to use. And I just realized how bad this is for people who've got a phobia about circles, but this is what I have been using. And if you do have a phobia about circles, then you'll be happy to know that I've come across a template and I wanted to share it with you. It is really, really useful. So I have created this myself, but it is because, well, I drew it myself. But the actual design comes from Pikarar, and I will link her video. And she did these fantastic swatches. I'm just going to do squares, but she did fantastic swatches within those square spaces and turned them into like cats and made it all very aesthetic. But I thought, this is actually even better than my stenciling because it reminds me of where I want to do more than the large swatch, and you'll see what I mean when I start swatching. We're going to kick off with Wicked Witch from Wiringil. In everyday writing, this presents as a dark blue-black, and I tend to use it if I'm not in the mood for a black ink, but I don't want a very vibrant blue. However, in large swatches, it does something interesting because it has a magnificent sheen. So that is going to come out on here because Midori is brilliant for showing sheen. And I like that this is immediately showing you what I meant by it being a good replacement for black, because it is like navy going into midnight. It is a very good everyday ink and one that I've reached for a lot of times. Now in the smaller swatch, the squiggle that I just did, you are going to see a little bit more shading than in the large swatch. And then this zebra G-nib is going to show you what a very fine line looks with it. So you don't really get the shading, you just get the very uniform look. And if you look above while I'm writing, you'll see that the large swatch is starting to dry on the edges, and we're seeing the red sheen develop. Definitely not shimmer because there's no added glitter. It is purely sheen, and you don't really get shading because of the amount of ink that's laid down in that larger area, but you do see some shading in the smaller swatch below it. Moving on to another blue-black, it is Jinhao Deep Blue. And this one is, again, another brilliant everyday ink if you want to break from black. But it is not as dramatic as the Wiringil Wicked Witch. It is also not going to have that somber sheening effect that we're seeing. And as I'm looking, it's getting more and more red. I think you can see that on the camera. But anyway, this template I just think is brilliant. So I highly recommend it. If you've seen my past swatches, it's far less consistent in the way that I actually do my swatching. So it's a really good reminder of what I actually want to be doing when I'm laying down the ink. And here you can see immediately that although I describe them both as a sort of blue-black, they are miles apart. This is definitely more vibrant when we've got the lighter sections, and it does appear blue-black in those really pooled areas. Now, if you don't have an ornament nib, you can do what I just did here, which was use the back of the cocktail stirrer. But I've got an ornament nib, so I'm going over it, and yeah, just to get a consistent size line with the previous swatch and all the others. Now, in writing, it is a far more uniform look to the ink, so you can see why I called this a great everyday blue-black ink. It doesn't appear as bright as it does in the large swatch. So the lighter areas in that large swatch are a lot brighter than you'd see in a fine line. Next, we go on to Waterman. I used to reach for this mysterious blue a lot, and I was really surprised when I started using it again. When I lay this down, it has a very vibrant blue quality to it. And what surprised me is that on the Midori especially, but even not on the Midori because I had a bit of a play, it has a warmer quality to it than I remember. I mean, right now it's just looking very vivid, bright, perhaps neutral, almost cool leaning. But as it dries, it develops a little bit more warmth. It doesn't go very, very sort of like teal or anything. It is still very much a softened medium blue. But I definitely recognize a very slight green undertone that I hadn't ever noticed before. So I guess it is mysterious in that way that it's making me see things that I hadn't seen before. It doesn't sheen much. It does in the end when it dries, but right now you're not seeing any sheening, but it will develop, especially at the bottom right where I had the most pooling of the ink. So we'll, see that when it's dried up and develop some more character. But moving on to another waterman, we are going on to Serenity Blue ink, and this is one of the most popular ones here on YouTube because loads of people use it when they're doing pen tests because it is just such a reliable ink. And because I want it side by side with Mysterious Blue, I'm switching my template to the other page so that we can have them sitting almost side by side and we can do a comparison of these two Waterman blue inks. Again on the cocktail stick, and as I lay this all down, it looks like a vibrant blue, and in fact this one stays vibrant. It doesn't go warmer the way that the one on the left is, the mysterious blue, but what you're not going to see in regular writing is the amount of sheening we're going to get from doing such a large swatch. But this sort of swatching allows you to see the complexity, the sheening effects that you can get in Waterman inks that you wouldn't usually see when you're using a standard fine nib, for example. And I'm really glad that I swatched these side by side because if you look to the left, you really see that warming up that's developing with the mysterious blue as it dries, and you've got this as a sort of contrast. I do also find that on this Midori paper, the mysterious blue shades a lot more than this Serenity blue, but they both do quite a bit of shading and remarkable amount of sheen in more pooled ink areas, but in writing they look fairly standard, as you can see. I do think they both have a sort of coppery sheen to them, both Mysterious and the Serenity Blue, but it looks a little bit red leaning in the Mysterious Blue, and I wonder if that's because of the undertone, whereas in this one it does look a lot more coppery as it develops. Next up is Jacques Herbin Blue Ocean, and I have to say that I am so annoyed with this bottle because it takes me forever to actually get the ink onto the back of that cocktail stirrer. I miss having the actual standard sizes, but I didn't want to commit to getting a full size of this because I do have that many blue inks. I'm happy to have a smaller amount. I do wish they had the dropper function, which I'll show you in other sample bottles. But anyway, enough about the bottle that you can tell I'm not a fan of. As I smush this down, you can see that this is a purple leaning blue. Really lovely, got some complexity in there. What we're not seeing much of, which is a bit disappointing, maybe I didn't shake that bottle enough, is the gold shimmer particles that is in the 1670 Blue Ocean. Hopefully as it dries we're going to see more of the actual shimmer in there. But it is a lovely blue, not much in terms of shading. I think the complexity does come from the shimmer. If you're using a very fine nib, you're not going to have that complexity. You're going to have something very standard, which is still attractive as an everyday ink, as you can see. But yeah, I really am not seeing the gold shimmer. And that weird absence of the gold shimmer is making me see the sheening effect of this ink. It has minimal sheening effect, but you can see in that pooled area there's a coppery section developing. Anyway, on to Monteverde Ocean Noir. And as Noir suggests, it is taking us into darker territory and it's making my voice go for some reason. But anyway, the concept behind the Noir collection is colors that are mixed with black, and that is exactly what this looks like. It is recognizably blue. It's not as blue-black as some of my inks, definitely not like the Wicked Witch, But as it dries, you see the blue-black leaning. Yes, it has enough blue to soften a page, but it remains serious like a humpback whale rather than playful like a dolphin. Anyway, enough ocean metaphors. And looking at this, it does definitely get darker as it dries, and we don't see much in the way of shading. We do, however, get quite a bit of sheen, which is a really lovely effect. They're only really visible in thick, broad strokes, so definitely not in a fine or medium. I think even a 1.1 stub would struggle to show the sheen, but it is a lovely, wet flowing, excellent everyday ink, so it performs well. Now, while the name of this one keeps us in that sort of aquatic sphere, Diamine Marine actually takes us outside of the territory of a real blue because we're going far more towards a teal color with this. It is lighter and brighter than any of the other 6 that I've just swatched. It has a medium shading effect, which we'll see with the writing or with the next swatch. So less so in this big one, where you tend to see most of the bright color and then just like little patches of darker areas where it's pulled. And when I mean that it shades in an interesting way, when I write with it on Midori, I actually feel like the shading creates an outline to my lettering, and you'll see that in this smaller swatch where all of the shading tends to pull towards the outer lines. And then again, when I do the last bit of writing, when I'm really flexing the diamine, not the diamine, the zebra G nib. What am I talking about? When I'm really flexing the nib. So when we get the wider areas, you see quite a bit of the shading effect. And I think that's really nice for a writing effect. This next one is going to be less teal and more blue again, but it is not a blue like the 6 that we did above. It is more aqua leaning, which the name suggests, because this is Diamine Aqua Lagoon. Can we take a moment to appreciate how much easier it was to actually get the ink on the page with this type of sample bottle that has the little dropper on the top of the section, whatever it's called? Let me know in the comments if you know what it's called. But I love these sample bottles. They just make things so much easier, even with applying the ink onto the nibs. And I'm liking having this Aqua Lagoon next to the Diamine Marine. They are different, yet you can see that they belong in the same family. So they look like sister turquoise, tealy leaning blues. They both also have a lovely flow. So they're saturated, but not saturated to the point where it feels a little bit dry on the page. You can just see the flow of it. And yep, the sample bottle again, love it. Just makes life so much easier. For writing, I definitely think of this as a shading ink, but when you're doing these large samples, especially on a paper like Midori MD, you definitely get sheening, and it's quite spectacular, the contrast between the reddish coppery sheen and the base color. So we'll wait for that to dry and you'll see it. And I thought it would be interesting to stick with the Lagoon, but go on to another brand, and we have got Robert Oster. Blue Lagoon, and I'm not going to hold against it that it's come in the other sample bottle. I don't know why Cult Pens sent me some of these and some of the other sample bottles, but anyway, this is definitely a clear turquoise blue, and it doesn't have any of the green leaning that we see in the previous 2, in the Aqua Lagoon or in the Marine. It is very much a vibrant blue. So we also don't have the warmth of some of the ones from the first 6 or the darkness of those first 6 either. It is one of the more brighter, clearer colors that I've got, and yet it still has some complexity. We can already see the shading effect, and you'll be able to see some sheening effect, and it seems to dry fairly quickly because the sheening developed really fast. And if you're anything like me, then a fast drying ink is actually a plus, because I tend to keep my wrist on the page as I'm writing. very often. At the moment, I'm not doing it. I'm being very well behaved, but my tendency is to actually smudge any inks that are very slow drying. So I always appreciate an ink that dries fairly fast. We're going to head back to Ringgil as a brand, and it's got a bit of shimmer at the bottom, but you can see they've kind of skimped on the shimmer. We've got one coming up in a bit, and they've been really generous with it. First, I'm going to skip across with the template because I've become so reliant on it. Imagine I used to do these swatches without a template, and now I'm just like, yes, please, can I have an outline? Well, I used to use a stencil, but yeah, not to this extent, and I really appreciate it. I'm trying to think if there's some rationale to them actually skimping on the shimmer in this one to get a stars effect, or maybe I'm overthinking it. But if you've got less shimmer and you got a really dark base like this, then perhaps it does justify the name of Stars in Autumn. And I do love this base color. It is a muted, sort of dusky blue gray shade. It looks warmer at the moment while it's being laid down, because I think the Midori warmth is coming through, that paper warmth, but as it dries it goes cooler and cooler and reminds me of a denim color or an evening sky rather than the electric blues that we've been looking at, or those turquoises. Yeah, I think that name-wise, it really does remind me of an evening sky. And unfortunately, I just wish there was more shimmer so that I could actually show it to you, because I don't think it's picking up while the ink is wet. Ringgil officially categorizes this one as a shading and glistening one because of the shimmer being in it, and you can obviously see the shading. What's interesting is on Midori you also get a visible amount of sheening effect, which you'll see when it's totally dry. So next up we have got Colorverse Supernova, and I took forever to actually use this Supernova because it just looked really basic. I was like, oh, it kind of reminds me of my standard blues that I've got so many of. I got this in the sample box for the Colorverse subscription box that I bought, which had a lot of blues. So it had the Colorverse Supernova, and it was the only one that I sort of left untouched for ages. And then when I finally tried it on Midori, I was blown away, and I tell you, I couldn't believe the amount of bright sheen on here. And it's not the usual copper, it's not the usual coppery red, it is a vibrant sort of pinky. And I'm giving things away, aren't I, because it's not even dried yet, but I couldn't hold that to myself. The one thing that I would say is that I'm not a fan of the drying time because it does not feel like a fast drying ink in the way that the Robert Oster Blue Lagoon was. I mean, if I compare it to my sheening inks like Octopus Fluids inks or Vinter sheening inks, then yes, it dries okay in a good amount of time. But when I compare it to the other ones that I've just swatched here, it takes a lot longer. So yeah, that's really where I'm coming from. But it is sort of worth the wait if you're going to be using this for calligraphy and you want that lovely effect that it has when it dries. Next we have Pelikan Golden Lapis. It seems fair to say that this ink almost needs no introduction because it is so popular on YouTube. It is this electric azure blue, absolutely stunning, bright and clear as a base. And then alongside that, Pelikan has paired it with a golden shimmer, a really vibrant, rich golden shimmer that settles across the surface of your writing, and they have not skimped on the shimmer. It provides lovely high contrast combination. And if you watched my video where I got this amazing bargain of a Smythson book, just love that book. I'm using it as a reading journal. That page that it's got, the blue color, I can barely speak, I'm so excited. Anyway, it's got blue colored pages, and I'll just take a breath, blue colored pages, and then I use this ink on it, and that particular paper really brings out the shimmer amazingly. This is a brilliant ink for writing. It just flows so well and behaves really well. So in broad, wet nibs, it shows loads of blue variation shading and also shows you the shimmer. I don't know why I'm getting so excited. I mean, you guys probably all know about this type of ink anyway. So it was the ink of the year for 2024 for Pelikan Edelstein. And here we go. Let's have a quick look at what we have on the page so far. I think that the sheening effect is just stunning in most of these. Let me know your favorite. The Wicked Witch, it's overwhelmed the base ink, but all of the others are far more moderate. And then we've got a few that are just shading rather than sheening inks, like the Diamine Marine. You can see a tiny bit of sheen in that Stars in Autumn and a little bit of the shimmer. And you can see the golden effect coming through on the Lapis. And the less we say about how I smudged the Supernova, the better. But it does make my point that it was the slower drying ink on this page. Not terribly slow in comparison to sheening inks, but with these ones. None of them bled through, which is excellent. So I'm very pleased with that. And then on this side, I had a feeling that I pressed really hard on the Diamine Aqua Lagoon. So that's really my fault. Okay, so we're going on to the next inks, and these are going to have more teal and turquoise ones. Now this Pilot Irishizuku Syo-ro really is an example of when I get confused with blues and greens, because I would classify it as a green, but I've seen it a number of times shown as a blue, and even the label looks more blue coded, yet the name translates to dew on pine tree, which again, pine tree is making me think of green, but dew makes me think of blue. So yeah, I'm clearly conflicted here. But anyway, it is a muted blue-green, I would say, to be on the safe side. I think with heavier application, you get some lovely dark reddish sheen, especially on this paper, and I love the effect. Beyond me having to categorize and stress about how much a particular ink leans into a particular color, I would just say enjoyment-wise, this is one of the ones that I enjoy the most. And you can imagine how sad I was that I actually spilt a little bit of this bottle, about, well, not quite a quarter, but quite a bit. So yeah, it was a tragic time. I'm a fan of the flow, the dry time, the saturation. It's brilliant. I didn't think I was going to be a fan of the Sailor Cult Pens exclusive Arctic Circle because it is fairly light. But again, I got a sample bottle when I bought the old subscription boxes. So I don't ever subscribe to anything, but Cult Pens was doing subscription boxes. And then when they had leftover ones, they would put them on general sale. And those are where I get my sample bottles from. And I was surprised that I actually really like this. So I like darker colors and I struggle with lighter ones. And yet it has just the right amount of shading, especially in writing, and weirdly less so when I do this large swatch. You can see the smaller swatch below the large one has got more shading, and that's what you get when you use a really big stub. So I enjoy that, and it is actually quite legible in a fine nib, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite blue. It's just one of the ones that gave me a pleasant surprise. Now, the creator, Pikarar, who actually shared how she does her templates, had used masking tape when she moved this around, and I didn't. And you can see the effect. I had it actually move upwards, so Arctic Circle is sitting above the Pilot Irishizuku Syo-ro sample. So we're just going to tape this in place the way it was supposed to have been. I guess I was lucky when I did the earlier samples, but anyway, the earlier swatches. Right, so we are going to go on to another Wiringule, but it is not the one that I was promising you has got tons and tons of shimmer. It is Dorothy, which is of course related to our very first Wiringule, which was Wicked Witch, and this one is far less dramatic, which I guess Dorothy was less dramatic than the Wicked Witch. So they try in Wiringule to actually match up the feel of a literary character or a story, and I think this is pretty good. You can also add shimmer potions to this. They give you things like silver shoes and all of that, and they do the same with Wicked Witch. But in terms of an everyday writing ink, I love it because where Wicked Witch was sheen heavy, This is amazing for shading, and I think that comes through straight away. You can see on the page it's drying fairly quickly, and it immediately has all of the complexity going with the lighter and darker variations of the base color, which is a lovely muted one and one of my favorites for how dynamic it looks without any sheen or shimmer. Feel free to berate me for this inclusion if you so desire. It is Reseda from Jacques Herbin, and the cover and the label look really blue, but of course the name suggests green, doesn't it? I've heard some people describe this as mint green, while others, and I'm in this camp, say turquoise green blue or blue green. Let me know what you think. This, I think, is a really beautiful color for spring and summer journaling. It sits outside my usuals, and I featured it for the first time when I was doing the whole my favorite Jacques Herbin inks, and it was one of the couple of inks where I said, you know what, this is a lot lighter, brighter area than I usually go for, and yet I'm loving it because it's got that popping, almost neon quality to it without being neon. So really vibrant and a real statement ink that I would use for annotation and for occasional notes outside of my usual everyday notes. So I find it really handy, like I say, especially for annotation, but I'd be happy sticking it into a bolder nib or bolder pen for headlines. And sticking with the Herbin brand, we have got Blue Myosotis, which is French for blue forget-me-nots or forget-me-not blue, and it has actually a cornflower blue tone to it when you've got the lightest shading to it. So I'll try and move the ink off so that we get the lighter areas, and you can see that really cornflower blue, and then the deeper, darker areas are a sort of indigo. But my favorite swatch is actually the second one, and you won't see it straight away because, yes, you can see it's all nice and fluid. It looks fairly solid, but when it dries, it's going to have the outline covered in sheening effect, and I really enjoy that. I think we last had that with the Diamine Marine. I like how it creates an outline, and as you can see, the writing is extremely, I don't know what else to say other than fluid. What could we say? It's a really free-flowing ink. Lovely. Next, we have Diamine Teal, and when I saw saw this one together with the Pilot Irishizuku Syo-ro, they look so complementary, like sister inks. It seems like a darker version of Syo-ro, so you got the base color being darker, but you also have a very similar sheening effect, slightly less so in the Diamine Teal, but yeah, I like them together and like recognizing that they sort of like sit side by side, though it has a lot more drama in the base and the Syo-ro has got more drama on the sheen, if that makes sense. Now, I was going to say, you're on the home stretch. This is my final ink because I imagine this is one of my longest ink swatching videos because I've never done 20. I usually do like 9, and I did my best to sort of like keep the timing, but I've actually still got 2 more to go because this is 18. So you're doing so well if you're still with me. Thank you. I just have to hope that you love ink swatches as much as I do and talking about the inks and sharing your favorites. So next up, I've got the one I've been promising, extra extra shimmer on Purpose of Life from Wiringule. And this is, I'm going to say it again, one of my favorites, and I think I've said that a few times. But what I love about this one is the complementary shimmer. So the base color and the shimmer colors really match up. Usually what I see in a shimmer ink is contrast. So base color one, and then you've got a contrasting shimmer on top, kind of like we had with Golden Lapis from Pelican. But with this, and I love the holographic effect when it's wet, but it doesn't really stay holographic in that way when it dries. But with this one, what I really enjoy when I say that they sort of match is you've got a cool blue base, and then the top has got a silvery blue, which is also cool. So you got everything cool leaning. It's not a huge contrast. They just sit together so, so well. And I have had the shimmer actually show in fine nibs, so it depends on what brand of pen you're using. But I've had a Yovo and definitely, obviously, with the cheaper Chinese pens, the fine nibs, showing the shimmer beautifully. Sometimes you get particular pens where the feed just clogs up with a fine nib, but this particular ink I've had a lot of luck with. Still, it looks best with a broad or a stub. And our 20th and final ink is Diamine Eau de Nil. I featured this as one of my favorites for 9 favorite diamine inks, and I did mention that I'm not sure about the naming convention because Water of the Nile, that particular color in the 50s and 60s, has a very, very different tone. It's very green leaning and almost sagey, sort of, yeah. Anyway, it's not this. But that aside, I really like this. It's a strong turquoise teal, very saturated, and in darker pooling, you get reddish edging. Though when I compare the sheening to the sheening in Diamine Teal, it does come across a little less red, so more copper leaning than that one, but I still feel like it's edging towards red from copper. It's a pretty good shading ink, but might sit in the middle of all of these 20 inks that we did. I think it's one of the better Diamine inks for shading, but we had other brands that perhaps do better than this one. It's also a really well-behaved ink, so I think all of the 20 that I've featured have been well-behaved. They're quite wet. They are not the sort of blues that stain your pen. Let me know if you've had any issues with them. I haven't, but it's always good to know if you've had any staining with a clear demonstrator, for example. So this is how the page is looking while the inks are still wet, and we will then go on to a final image of all of the dry samples so that we can see the final effect, because as you know, it can shift quite dramatically for some inks. And here we go. This is the first set that we did, the first 12. And the last 8. I had to count. So let me know your favorites, and as usual, thank you so much for joining me, and take care.